Another one of the delay start. Okay, fine. We'll discuss few questions of the sleeves. The last time we discussed the questions on the pulmonary disease, and we have finished up to question 20. After that, we'll start with the question 21. Uh, Principal phagocytes in the lungs. It's a pretty easy, very simple question. I don't think there's much to discuss about it. Definitely alveolar macrophages. Which one is not recommended for the treatment of acute asthma? You know, acute asthma is an emergency, and in acute asthma, this is asthma is an irreversible obstruction of the especially the airways. So, and the main treatment of modality is beta 2 agonist and steroids, to address the inflammatory pattern of the asthma, and for the symptomatic relief of the blockage you need beta 2 agonist, and in beta 2 agonist you have long acting and short acting. So when you have an acute exacerbation of bronchial asthma or an acute asthma, you have an exacerbation, so you definitely need a short acting beta 2 agonist. So the answer of choice will be which one is not recommended basically. If not short acting beta 2 agonist, you can give steroid. It's a form of hydrocortisone, and additionally you can give ipratropium, which is an anticholinergic, short acting, fast acting, and magnesium sulfate is given intravenously because it has muscle relaxant capacity. So it has been found to be effective in acute cases of asthma. But very importantly, in any acute cases, the first and the foremost treatment of choice is oxygen therapy. Without oxygen therapy, none of these are going to work. And so the overall, you don't have a beta 2 agonist over here. You have a beta 2 agonist, but that is a long acting salmeterol, and its onset of action is relatively long, so it won't be helpful in cases of acute asthma. So it's a very direct choice, salmeterol, that can be used in acute asthma. I hope there is no problem in the network. Then FEV1 and FAC ratio is reduced in, FEV1 FEV force expiratory volume in for the first second, and ratio upon forced vital capacity. So basically it's an assessment of expiration after a full inspiration. So if there is any problem in the expiratory pattern, in the expiratory airways, just what happens usually happens in asthma, in COPD, where you have bronchial obstruction. You've obviously your FEV1 is also reduced, and FEV1 FVC ratio is also reduced. So as far as lung fibrosis and pleural effusion is concerned, you don't have any reduction in FEV1 and FEVC. In pleural effusion, not necessarily you will have problem with FEV1 or FVC, because that has to do with the bronchial pathology or any obstruction in the airways. Lung fibrosis, where it's a less restricted type of lung disease. So in the restricted type of lung disease, you will have diminution FEV1 as well as FVC. So eventually the ratio will be normal or increased. It will never be reduced. So the answer of choice is asthma. Then question number 24, thickening of the pulmonary alveolar capillary membrane. Oh, this is a very tricky question, and I don't know what is the answer key which we have posted, but so thickening of the pulmonary alveolar capillary membrane. So this the defect is in the alveolar level, at the alveolar level, and you know the asthma, bronchitis, and emphysema mostly involves the airways, not on the alveolar level, that is the acinus level. But the pulmonary fibrosis can definitely affect at the alveolar level, at the interface of the alveoli and the basement membrane of the and the capillary epithelium. So answer of choice will be C, that is fibrosis. Then drug of choice for treatment of type 2 brittle asthma. The point is, what is brittle asthma? Brittle asthma are two types, where you any exacerbation of bronchial asthma. Type 1 brittle asthma is where you have variation in the acute attacks of asthma. The variation in the symptom, it runs for more than 40% variation you will have in the FEV1 and FEVC values throughout the day, and it will involve more than 50% of the duration of the day. So type 1 brittle asthma is patient is not well controlled, and patient has been falling for acute exacerbation, and in the normal 24 hours he will be having more than 12 hours of the time he will be having acute exacerbation, and there will be variation in the clinical symptoms, and that will be seen in patients who are not properly controlled. While type 2 brittle asthma is usually seen in the patient who are well controlled, and there is a sudden exacerbation, and the variation will be again more than 50%, and there will be it will be a very impending kind of asthma, where patient need to be addressed as quickly as possible. So the treatment of type 2 brittle asthma is subcutaneous epinephrine. Nothing works as fast as subcutaneous epinephrine. So the answer of choice is D. Kirschmann spirals in sputum is seen in, this is a very typical pathological finding, where the sputum have a spiral shape, and it is found in asthma. It's very typical of asthma. The best treatment option in patient with COPD with low SpO2 at rest is, obviously you have option quit smoking, bronchodilators, low flow oxygen, and mucolytics. So any if there is any desaturation or any exacerbation in patients with COPD or in patients with asthma, where you will find there is a sudden fall in the saturation, and patient is dyspneic, and patient is in a dire need of oxygen. So you will definitely, the first treatment of choice is oxygen. A low flow oxygen is the first treatment of choice for any exacerbation, and over the top of it you will have all those bronchodilators and steroids working. I think we have been disconnected also. Just a minute. अरे भैया, 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 ओ भैया, कैसे हो गया? हमेशा ही हो जाता है, कोई नया थोड़ी हो जाएगी, पहली बार हो रहा है। यहाँ कहाँ है गार्ड, क्या उसको बुलाओ, बैठे खड़ा होगा यहाँ।
Welcome and thank you for choosing freeconferencecall.com. You're helping people around the world communicate for free. Muted.
डिस्कनेक्ट हो गया सर।
हाँ भाई,
तो ये तो ऑटोमेटिक स्टार्ट हो गया सर, पीपीटी
स्टार्ट हो गया।
ये पीपीटी ऑटोमेटिक, मैं कुछ नहीं किया हूँ, ये स्टार्ट ही है।
डिस्कनेक्ट हो गया था बीच में।
नहीं, ये तो ऑटोमेटिक दोनों पीपीटी ले लिया है सर।
चल रहा है।
हाँ सर।
और वॉल्यूम
वॉल्यूम भी आ रहा है, बोलिए।
Are you able to hear me? Okay, there was certain technical issues. We were on the question number 27, the best treatment option in patient with COPD with low SpO2. As I talked about, low flow oxygen is the best treatment of choice. Right. Are we well connected? आ रहा है, ठीक है। सो नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन इज ऑल आर सीन इन क्रॉनिक ब्रोंकाइटिस। नहीं, वो तो ऑटोमेटिकली डिस्कनेक्ट हो जाता है, अभी नहीं है लेकिन अपने आप हो जाता है। ऑल आर सीन इन क्रॉनिक ब्रोंकाइटिस एक्सेप्ट obviously chronic bronchitis, the definition is chronic any cough more than 3 months over consecutively for 2 years, and bronchoria is a common symptom. And there is something called Hoover sign. Hoover sign is rib retraction. On a powerful expiration you will have a rib retraction and indrawing of intercostal muscles. So that is what Hoover sign is, which is seen in chronic bronchitis because of the air hunger. Clubbing is usually not a part of COPD as such, not very common. So that's so the answer of choice is D, clubbing. All are true about emphysema except, and then obviously you will have barrel shaped chest, then you have associated with smoking, then it is a type 1 respiratory failure where in emphysema basically you will have hypoxemia and carbon dioxide level might be normal or low. So this is of a type 2 respiratory failure is you have. So in emphysema you will have type 1 respiratory failure where you have hypoxemia and normal PCO2 level. But cyanosis is usually not usually the emphysematous patient, they are called pink puffers because there is air trapping, there is increase in the residual lung volume and the residual air in the airways. So basically they are called pink puffers. So cyanosis is not really a typical symptom of emphysema. Then faults about emphysema. The faults about emphysema, you have again you have decreased FEV1 or decreased time vital capacity or increased residual volume or increased deficient capacity. Obviously, they will have decreased FEV1. As you know, you have decreased time vital capacity, which is true about emphysema, and there is an increase. There is an air trapping. There is an increased residual volume, which is again true about emphysema. But increased deficient capacity, as we talked about, the passage of inhalational carbon monoxide, and you will see for the uh, how the air, how much percentage of carbon dioxide it get across the air capillary interface. So usually in emphysema, the problem is at the airways level, the small and the large bronchi. So you don't have problem with the alveoli level. So there won't be if there is any problem in the alveoli, which usually happen with the subsequent destruction which happens in the emphysema, then that would lead to decreased efficient capacity. It would never lead to increased efficient capacity. Can you name a condition where we will have a decrease in we will have an increased efficient capacity? Chronic cardiac failure will be one condition which will have increased deficient capacity. Then question number 31 is least likely to occur in chronic bronchitis. Obviously, in chronic bronchitis, as we talked about, so there will be pulmonary hypertension because of the persistent hypoxemia, spontaneous pneumothorax, that is the blebs which are there is a spontaneous uh, uh, rupture of the plebs, which usually takes place in emphysema but not in chronic bronchitis, because in chronic bronchitis you definitely have increase in mucus gland hyperplasia and increase in mucus gland secretion. But the spontaneous pneumothorax never happens there. Respiratory acidosis might, because of hyperventilation, you will have decreased CO2, and invariably it will lead hyperventilation will lead to respiratory acidosis. Polycythemia, because again because of the persistent hypoxia, you might have polycythemia, that is increase in hemoglobin levels. But spontaneous pneumothorax is not a part of chronic bronchitis. Then question number 32, all of the following are the characteristic signs of cor pulmonale except. Obviously the cor pulmonale, you know, that is because of the right-sided heart failure, where you have increase. Cor pulmonale usually happens in the COPD. It is an advanced stage of COPD where you have increased pulmonary pulmonary hypertension, pulmonary arterial hypertension, and that will lead to right heart failure. And right heart failure will inevitably lead to increase in JVP. That might be congested hepatomegaly because of the back pressure through the vena cavas, and then you can have left parasternal heave because of the increase in the dilated right half of the heart. But P2, that's a since there will be pulmonary hypertension because of the cor pulmonale, P2 will be accentuated, not quite. That is not possible because P2 signifies the because of the blockage of the pulmonary valves. So the sound produced by the blockage of the pulmonary valves will be accentuated. So P2 will be not quite. It will be accentuated. Then you have one of the following other characteristic signs of cor pulmonale. We talked about this. Question number 33 is a muscle of expiration. The muscles of expiration is diaphragm helps in the expiration. Internal intercostal and external intercostal helps in the expiration, as well as the elastic recoil of the lungs. But the rectus abdominis does not involved in expiration. Then question number 34, cor pulmonale is rarely caused by. Obviously, pectum cor pulmonale can be a part of a pulmonary tuberculosis, obstructive emphysema, or sarcoidosis. As we talked about, cor pulmonale leading to right heart failure due to pulmonary hypertension. But pectum excavatum is the structural problem of the chest, where you have the sternum is it is a concave shaped sternum, but that might lead to restrictive lung disease. but it's not very common. The core pulmonary is not very common with cases of pectum excavatum. So the answer is A. Not a known cause of ARDS. Pneumonia and sepsis are the most common cause of ARDS, and that's amniotic fluid embolism is again another cause of ARDS. CCF, because ARDS is basically a non-cardiac pulmonary failure or pulmonary edema. So congestive cardiac failure is a cardiac cause for which is a chronic cardiac failure, and that will might lead to pulmonary edema, but that will be a cardiac cause. And ARDS is basically a non-cardiac case of pulmonary edema. So the answer of choice is D. Hypoxemia while receiving 100% oxygen indicates. So, well, there can be impaired diffusion when you're receiving 100% oxygen and still you have a hypoxemic. So there might be impaired infusion. There can be a hypoventilation, or there can be a ventilation perfusion mismatch, or right to left shunt. So obviously while you are receiving 100% oxygen, and if there is an impaired diffusion or hypoventilation or ventilation perfusion mismatch, so you might have hypoxemia, but very common is right to left shunt, because when you are given 100% oxygen and then still the oxygen level in the arterial oxygen level is still less, and when there you have a right to left shunt, so what happens, the oxygen, until unless there is a shunt, the oxygen mixing, or the right side of the heart is the blood from the right side of the heart is not properly oxygenated through the lungs. So when there is a right to left shunt, until unless whenever there is a right to left shunt, there will be mixing. There is mixing of the venous and the arterial blood, the oxygenated and deoxygenated blood, and there will be shunting of the blood from the right side of the heart to the left side, and so there will be obviously the very typical symptom will be, even while receiving 100% oxygen, your SpO2 would never show 100%, it would never indicate 100%, it would always on the lesser side. But that doesn't happen in impaired diffusion or hypoventilation or ventilation perfusion mismatch, because in these conditions definitely you will have hypoxemia, but once you are on 100% oxygen, there are chances that your SpO2 level might goes back to 98 or 99%. But in right to left shunt, in right to left shunt, it would always be less. All show wide alveolar arterial oxygen gradient except. So alveolar arterial oxygen gradient, basically as the word says, the alveolar oxygen difference in the alveolar oxygen to the arterial oxygen. So obviously wherever you have impaired diffusion, you will have widened alveolar arterial oxygen gradient. So it will, if all these conditions, bronchiectasis or ARDS or interstitial fibrosis, or these all three conditions, this gonna affect the oxygen diffusion to some extent and to great extent as well. So there will be always a wide alveolar arterial gradient, but the central hypoventilation, it won't manifest as a wide alveolar arterial gradient, because already you have a central cause for the decrease in the whenever there is a central hypoventilation, because of the central cause the patient tend to hypoventilate, so whatever the oxygen is in the alveoli is going to pass on to the arteries, so there would never be a gradient. There might be a hypoxemia, but there would never be an alveolar arterial gradient. The question number 38 is pulmonary hypertension in COPD is due to, obviously it's a vasoconstriction, and because of the hypoxemia and because of the interstitial fibrosis, and all the three choices are correct. Best test for pulmonary embolism, you all know the best test for pulmonary embolism is obviously CT with contrast. It's the most reliable and most convenient test. Most common ECG finding for pulmonary embolism. You don't have to look beyond this. Sinus tachycardia will be the most common sign for pulmonary embolism. Because of the stress, the patient tend to they will have tachycardia. He will be in stress, and to tide over the stress, his heart rate will be fast. His respiratory rate will be fast. On an ECG, will be manifested as sinus tachycardia. So. Next 20 questions we'll discuss in the next class. We'll now talk about thyroid hormone. It's a very we'll talk about the thyroid hormone, and I said we'll finish up the thyroid hormone as soon as possible. So first of all, we'll talk about the physiology. You know, the thyroid gland is located immediately below the larynx, and it has two lobes, and it is connected to the isthmus, and it normally weighs 50 to 20 grams. And thyroid secretes two major hormones, thyroxine and triiodothyronine, which is also represented as T4 and T3. And both of these hormones profoundly increases the metabolic rate of the body, and it is primarily controlled by the TSH from the anterior pituitary gland. And the TSH in the anterior pituitary gland is invariably controlled through the thyroid releasing hormone, which is secreted by the hypothalamus. And 93% of the active hormone which is secreted by the thyroid gland is thyroxine, and that is T4, and the 7% is triiodothyronine, T3. So the 93% of the active hormone secreted by the thyroid gland is thyroxine, and 7% is T3. But thyroxine is eventually converted to T3 in tissues such as liver, kidneys, and spleen, and even in the brain. So importantly, in the peripheral vessels, in the peripheral even the tissues, the major T4 is being converted to T3, and so the other thing is T3 is 4 times as potent as T4, and it is present in the blood in a much smaller quantity, and it's present for a shorter time than T4. But most importantly, the most of the physiological and metabolic function are being manifested or being implicated by T3. Though T3 is being secreted in a smaller quantity, it is the receptors on the periphery, on the tissues, and on the periphery vessels for T3 affinity is very high for the receptor, more than 10 times more higher than the T4. So the T3 is the major thyroid hormone, which is basically responsible for all the metabolic functions. Thyroid hormone is synthesized in the basically you have closed follicles, and these follicles are they have a secretory substance which is called colloid, and as you know, the colloid contains a large glycoprotein that is called as thyroglobulin. So what happens, the endo-ER and the Golgi apparatus, it's synthesized and secretes the thyroglobulin into the follicles, and then the thyroglobulin contains the thyroid hormones T3 and T4 within its molecules. What happens, as we'll talk in the next slide, this is the follicular cells, this is the colloid which contains T3 thyroglobulin and T3 T4. These are tyrosine residues which are been iodinated and which is stored as a T3 T4, and these are cuboidal follicular cells, and these are palafollicular cells. So what happens when you have normal quantities of thyroxine, almost 59 milligram of ingested iodine in the form of iodides are required each year. So whenever the iodides are they're basically orally absorbed from the GIT, and they are removed by the cells of the thyroid